According to interviews with Ukrainian foreign volunteers, it sounds like Ukrainian commanders have leapfrogged right over the United States and NATO and are already organizing their command posts to fight in the 21st century. How does this differ from a NATO standard staff? We are going to talk about all that right now. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So this is coming to us from Defense One, and the title of the article is what the U.S. military can learn from Ukrainian command posts. The interview particularly focuses on Nathan Chan, a foreign volunteer, former U.S. Marine, who served with the Ukrainian military in Bakhmut, Ukraine from February until May. Now, the interesting part is that the Chan reports that having served in a Ukrainian headquarters for some time, it's run fundamentally differently from a U.S. Army or Marine Corps headquarters, and especially their largest operation centers. So let's talk about some of the key ways that this differs. One, the number one way, Chan reports, is Starlink, right? Starlink is a massive project in which brings high-speed internet to basically anywhere on the globe using really SpaceX's satellites. It allows 100 megabit connection that can be put up by someone with no special training in satellite or connectivity tech, right? It's literally just a modem. Chan reports that when he was in the Marine Corps, and I can vouch this is exactly how this worked, they needed a huge truck to get like 4 megabits a second. And that's true. When I was in Afghanistan, we had to have specialists come out and set up a satellite connection to give us internet, just so we could do things like order parts over an internet-based system or communicate with other forward operating bases over secure internet sources. And so even getting limited connectivity to talk to other bases was an extreme effort. So you're seeing here 10 years later, right? And a military like Ukraine can get 100 megabit connections, right? That's as much as that you could be gaming or streaming with that sort of connection. Multiple people could be gaming or streaming with that sort of connection. It really changes what you can do inside that operations center. And as Chan points out, he actually reports that the operations centers have a problem of too much information due to the robust internet connection, but also the use of technology like drones. And here's what I thought was really interesting. The troops in Ukraine will use Starlink, and then will use commercial tech like Signal or Google Meet to stream drone footage from commercially made drones, right? Commercial radios get reconfigured to be slightly more secure as an additional means of communication. And this is sort of fascinating because in the Cold War military, right, radio signals from a headquarters were extremely valuable intelligence. And if you could obtain even the metadata from a signal to or from a headquarters, you could learn something, right? The classic example being in the Pentagon, right? Soviet spy satellites found that in the center of the Pentagon, there was this room, this building, where they would see hundreds of people pass through a day. They thought this must be some sort of classified information hub, or this must be a top secret briefing room where the most VIP individuals get access to the highest level of U.S. classification. And just from that data, they said, we know we need to target the Pentagon. There's something so important there. Turned out it was a hot dog stand, and people would go there at lunch because they made just really good hot dogs. And the reason I say this is because that's how closely the limited amount of radio or electronic communication was. There was so little of it that every transmission had to be tightly secured because at the highest levels of the Kremlin or the Pentagon, it would be decoded, right, and analyzed, and they would try to infer some piece of information from it. But now you have to think, imagine, right, you were running operations for a Ukrainian battalion. Think about the scale of inputs, hundreds and hundreds of megabytes a second of HD video from your drones, of pictures, phone calls, text messages from your dozens of subordinate unit troops in the field. You also have emails coming in from the staff at the higher levels from Kiev. So you have just a huge volume of information, and multiply that by the dozens of Ukrainian battalions operating, dozens, maybe even hundreds of Ukrainian battalions operating across the front line. And you see that for a country like Russia, simply interpreting those signals will take so long and be so tedious that it's simply not worth it. So the reason you can use some of these public, forums is not because they are super secure. It's because they're secured by the fact that there's so very many of them. And imagine you could get access to the drone footage, right? Well, if Russia got access to the drone footage, one, what is that drone footage going to show, really, that Russia can't find itself? Russia has their own drones that they can fly pretty much wherever they want on the battlefield. So it's not that secretive. And two, how long is it going to take for Russia to hack the signal, process where and when it is, send it down to subordinate Russian commanders who will then send that information to troops in the field? It takes so long that by the time that information conduit happens, the information will no longer be relevant, right? And because these tools are commercial, they easily integrate with each other. Now, military Chan says, and I agree with him on this point too, military communications tools are designed to be highly specialized, right? They often require specialized staff for each application, such as an artillery coordination or communications platform. And the reason he says there's a lot of proprietary and non-cooperative IT systems at work. And this is something that, of course, Army commanders themselves have said. U.S. Army commanders have said that their command posts, here's the problem. The U.S. Army, it's inherent to the acquisitions process. The U.S. Army will say, we need a better way to receive fire missions. And so they'll say, great, this is what the technology has to do. It has to receive fire missions, it has to process it, and it has to be able to send them back out. Well, if you're a defense contractor, what is the least profitable way to run that? Well, the answer would be to design a simple script and a little interface that basically just integrates off of existing Microsoft technology. And you just layer it on top of it and you bid it out to the Pentagon, and the Pentagon says, great, thank you for this. It's perfect. The problem is that when you're a defense contractor, how do you make the most money? The most money would be to sit there and go, great, we have a platform, but we manufacture a computer terminal that sits at the artillery point, the artillery fire base, and a different terminal and software that operates at the command center, and another set of terminals that operate, that relay signals to and from. And so then they say, okay, well, you're going to have one of our techs out there too to do regular updates because it's a very technical, secure system. And then they'll say, and there's a licensing fee because we have to continually push software updates for this technology. And if they don't get updated, then they stop working. They can't talk to each other anymore. And so the most profitable piece of military technology is one that you get what's called lock-in, right? You lock in the military to use your system, and because they can't vary it, right? Because nobody else is going to come in and scoop it because it's proprietary. It's a great way to bilk the government for money, to design a system that fulfills an absolutely essential role that has no ability to communicate with any other system. And so when you multiply that by hundreds of data systems, hundreds of different things you need to track, right? There's a bespoke system for ordering vehicle parts in the military that we had to deal with in Afghanistan. And there's a bespoke system for processing pay requests and processing promotions, and how do you submit your NCOERs, and you submit your patrol reports in a different format, and you submit your request for flight using a different system. And if you want air support or drone support, it's got to be done in a still different proprietary system. And somewhere there's always some officer who's running each one of these systems at the brigade level, at least. Oftentimes there's a battalion version of this as well. And the Army thinks it's solving problems, but the truth is that in a modern company, no company would ever do this. They would hire a couple of devs and they would build an in-house tool that just sits on top of or integrates with their existing tools. And that's what Ukraine has functionally done, right? Like, what drone company, let's say you're making drones to record, let's say, facility security, right? To drive around to fly around the perimeter of a nuclear facility to check if anyone's entering, or to get footage, high HD footage of a building that you're a realtor and you're going to sell the building. Well, of course you're going to want it to be able to integrate with Google Suite, right? Of course you're going to want it to integrate with commonly used messaging apps like Signal. So you have the civilian sector that has an incentive to integrate with technologies. And Google wants more technologies because Google wants to lock you into their suite, their world of suites, as does Apple. So, of course, Google's going to sit there and go, oh, you want a payment system or you want an email platform. Well, of course, it's going to work inside the Google ecosystem, you know? So you have these two opposite effects where in the military acquisitions process, there's incentive to never integrate with your rival's technology. And in the civilian world, there's an incentive to constantly integrate with other sort of meta platforms technology. And so what you end up with in the US military, as Chan points out, you end up with a tremendous number of staff running and managing these incredibly, almost pointlessly complex systems. And oftentimes their role in running these systems is a little more than data checker or person who passes information up the chain of command. It's oftentimes just simply entering data into a specialized system. In contrast, right, there's no specialized staff that you need to run a Google Meet or even a Google Forms, right? You could literally have a Google Form sheet for a fire mission that you just submit, right? Now, Russia is able to identify these command posts, though, Ukrainian command posts, by looking for radio emissions, analyzing satellite maps, spotting clusters of cars with drone flights, and finding clusters of cell signals or just good old-fashioned, old-school human spies within the Ukrainian population. So the Ukrainians keep staff numbers really low. And the joke is the U.S., right, when I went to our battalion headquarters in Afghanistan, right, it would be a 200-person command post, which Chan describes as ludicrous. Now, here's what I thought was most interesting. Our company CP, our company TOC, or Tactical Operations Center, which controlled, up to, I think, 5 to 7 maneuver elements. I'm trying to think, 2 squads per platoon, 2, 4, 6, up to 6 maneuver elements in sector. That was actually about the size of this Ukrainian command post. It was, we had at the absolute height of operations, maybe 10 people working there, processing and putting out this information. Now, the other thing, but there was a lot less complexity, right? Like we sort of would call for fire, but we weren't doing extensive fires planning. The problem is, of course, Ukraine may be just keeping these command posts smaller than they themselves would like. Ukraine has been very public that it lacks staff officers who can work with all of this data that they have access to. And Chan points out, quote, essentially an entire team of trained people would be needed to process the information they're receiving in a usable way, right? And this is sort of a tremendous problem, honestly, because remember, it's not about staff. Being a staff officer is a sort of thankless job, right? You definitely know when you fail. Nobody knows when you've succeeded. But it requires actually a pretty high level of intellectual sophistication. And I don't mean that to disparage light infantry troops, but, a 19-year-old private is not going to be able to read 30 different patrol reports in the example of our staff and process them into meaningful information and put them into an Excel spreadsheet and try to discern some kind of pattern or system to what's going on in the front lines. It's just too much, right? That sort of ability to receive and process information is really requires a college degree level of professional work. I'm not saying you literally need a college degree, but generally the ability to receive and synthesize information and produce it into some sort of actionable intelligence is kind of like the hallmark of the liberal arts education. And so, unfortunately for Ukraine, college-educated men really appear to have fled the country in greater numbers than non-college educated Ukrainians, which is hard because, again, working in a TOC or military operations center is not that high risk of work. Though, as Chan points out, the headquarters he has been in several times were hit by artillery or missile fire. And he basically survived because they were well secured, and at one point just because they got lucky. The warhead didn't detonate. And of course, right, as Chan points out, none of the ability to process information is a substitute for good intel from the ground. Chan recounts how at one point he was using mapping software, again, probably like Google Earth or something, to mark off individual buildings within Bakhmut as they were reported taken by Russian forces. However, in some cases, the buildings were still held by Ukrainian forces, and it was simply a reporting error. Now, Chan discovered it in time, but before Ukraine started launching strikes. But again, staff can't be any smarter than the data they receive. But the oftentimes, I think the takeaway from this is that for the U.S. military, they have to change the way they think about their tools. They have to start building tools that look like, for example, Google Suite. Right? Look at every major tech company in the United States. None of them, not a one of them, run a bunch of weird, disparate systems for core, important tasks. They do one of two things. They rely on a single set of suite, basically either a Microsoft where Outlook, calendars, chats like Microsoft Teams, all integrate together, right? And they all work with one another to make sure that operations run smoothly. Or you choose Google, right? You use Google Calendar, Google Meet, Gmail, GChat, and they all work together. But almost nobody is out here. Imagine if you had a chat app that didn't talk to your calendar app, that didn't talk to your email app, that didn't talk to your document sharing app, that didn't talk to your document editing app. That's sort of how government works because of this stovepiped acquisitions process. And it is something that Ukraine has realized by necessity has no place on the modern battlefield. And unfortunately, I think because of the way defense contractors basically capture the market for these sort of things, the U.S. military is going to have to learn the lesson that they need more efficient systems the hard way. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you, except for the fact that if you are looking to make your life systems more efficient, you don't need a giant defense contractor purchased system. You just need some StrikeGum, right? StrikeGum is the energy drink in a single piece of gum, right? This little piece contains all the caffeine of a Red Bull or an Amp Energy, but zero sugar. Plus, it contains 100 milligrams of alpha GPC for further mental clarity. And you can check it out. We have 10% off a military discount. And if you sign up for our discount emails, we'll give you 10% off, a code right there, right on day one. So check us out, StrikeGum.com. And of course, if you know any buyers who can help get us into stores, be sure to contact Dan at combatfitnews.com. Link is in the description. But thanks to the thousands of people who've supported StrikeGum so far. Cheers.